Hello, I'm George from Pavliscak Studios, and I'll be making a glass marble today out of glass rods over a propane oxygen torch. I just have to get my torch ready to go. I'm going to turn on the propane regulator and the oxygen regulator and then adjust the pressures accordingly. Alright, so for the oxygen regulator there's a high side and a low side. The main pressure you turn on, but you have to make sure your low side gauge is completely disengaged, because the high pressure coming into the low pressure gauge, if it's on, will destroy it. So when you turn it off, it's always good to be aware of the order in which you are doing things when you're bleeding your lines for safety at the end of your torching session. So the guideline is POOP. You turn on the propane first, you turn on the oxygen, then you turn off the oxygen, and you turn off the propane when you're done. When I'm turning off the oxygen, I bleed the tanks at that time. I turn off the main valve, let all the oxygen run out of the line, then I zero out the low side gauge, then I close the valve on the torch. Then for the propane, I turn off the gauge at the tank, let the lines bleed out because the propane is still on fire until it comes completely out, and then you turn off the valve on your torch. So in this case, all my gauges are on, high and low side, for both the propane and the oxygen. I can turn on the propane first and light it. I use a spark lighter so that there isn't another source of fuel hanging out on my desk somewhere, like a lighter. A hot piece of glass hits that lighter, and that lighter could pop, explode, and go sailing around and catch other things on fire, especially if your workspace has not been cleaned and fireproofed like it should. Where I'm working, I'm in a fume hood that I've made myself. It's got a ventilation. Everything is coated with cement board. I'm on a cement floor. I have safety valves on my oxygen and propane tanks. Alright, so enough tech talk for now. Let's get going. Turn on the propane. I'll have to adjust my camera a little bit. Turn on the oxygen. Get my flame to a nice neutral. The marble I'm making today out of glass rods is what I call a tornado marble, and you saw them in the pre-show, and you can see them on my website or in any of the marble books or websites that I'm on. I'm going to be using a large diameter clear rod to gather the most of the glass for the marble. The tiny bits of color that will be in the marble will come from little glass rods, standard glass rods that you get from a glass supplier. Some different kinds of UV glass that I've made here in my studio. This is a Vaseline type ultraviolet sensitive glass, and this is a glow powder encased type of glass. And I'll also be using gold and silver leaf. Silver leaf comes in sheets, and I have it cut sitting in the rouge paper inside of a tin to keep it from getting moisture on it or having air motion disrupted, because it is very sensitive. So I'm getting the piece of silver that I want out now, and I'm putting it on the little marver plate, which is a graphite plate I have right next to me for shaping the glass. And then here is gold leaf. It's difficult to see. As you can see, there's big pieces and little pieces. Big pieces I use for wisps and monster eye styles, and the smaller pieces I use for tornadoes and galaxias. If you still have a landline like I do, it's going crazy right now because it's election season. But I still keep it for emergency purposes. Alright, so I have my metal foil set, I've got my color set, I've got my rods ready to go. My marbles ready to get made. These rods are new. They have a cut end. So I'm going to flash them to gradually bring the temperature up from room temperature up to about 500 or 600 degrees. At that point, I'll be able to just heat them. I'm going to get a gather on the end of this rod. It'll start looking like a ball on the end of the rod. It'll get to be about a third to twice the diameter, a third to half as much, again, as the diameter of the rod. Once I have that gather to the right size, I'm going to flatten it on my marver plate, which is a carbon tablet that's next to my torch. Then I'm going to, before it starts to cool down, I'm going to pick up my first piece of metal. Then I'm going to build clear layer, color, clear, color, clear, color, along with UV glass. And then I'm going to pick up metal at the end, and then cover that with clear. And then I'll have the whole marble built, and then I can start to do the spinning. I was shaking everything. Isn't that hilarious? When you torch for a long time, you get good at separating your hands. They're doing different things on different sides of your body, but a lot of times it just goes right back, and you have to do the same thing on both sides. It must look amazingly ridiculous. I can't wait to watch and laugh at myself. Alright, since this is a new rod, a lot of times when it heats up to orange, you can see that it's got some scum on the end. Little white impurities. That was where the cut end was. So I'm just going to tweeze that off. And I've got that hissing noise as I have a little jar of water and these tweezers, and anytime I have anything hot that I'm getting rid of, that I know I'm not going to use again, it goes right in the water. And the water will cool it instantly into just dust or frit. So now this gather is starting to get round on the end. In another 30 seconds it'll start looking like a ball. That's when I can start really building my marble. I will have to do the same flashing of the rod on the other end, but I'll be keeping this one hot in the back flame. I'm going to adjust my camera a little bit because I don't think you can quite see my torch. Now I need to smooth this out. Alright, that's better. I went a little long setting up upstairs for the pre-show, and so I was a little hurried with the camera setup. So it looks dumb. Now it's better. Alright. It's starting to look like a ball. You can see that in the regular. You can see it slumping down because it's hot. I'm going to get a little bit bigger. And I'm going to scale up my flame another 10%. Getting large gathers with these clear rods can be slow, but also if the heat is high, you can actually burn off some impurities or shrink them to the point where you can just go in and grab what's left with the tweezer real quick. And that glass is looking very nice and clean and sparkling clear. Which is what you want, because this marble is mostly clear. There's just some UV glass, a little flash, sparkle of silver and gold leaf, and that 2 dots of color, and the rest is all twisting and turning. And the cool thing about that is that you get to look through the clear into that color and in blacklight into the UV and that metal, and it just looks great from all angles if you do it right. So that's my first gather. I'm going to flatten this out on my marble, and now it's a disc on the end. I'm going to go and pick up my gold. And there is the gold. That little black thing is a little piece of rouge paper that caught on fire. There. I blew off that ash, and there is the gold. Beautiful. Alright, now I'm going to keep this in the back flame and start flashing this other big rod. And I'm going to get a big gather on it. Cover over this gold. You need to keep this gold and this disc warm, but if it's too hot, I will burn that gold right off of there. An expensive mistake. Hello to those who have joined us. Good to see you again. Alright, so this is staying warm. There's my gold again, for those who might have just joined us. My big clear rod has started to melt. This is, again, a cut end rod, so there's going to be some impurities. You'll see me switch both of these rods to one hand so I can grab my tweezer and get the little impurities off the end of this one. I thought I briefly touched the head of the torch with the glass, which is why I was checking like that without my glasses, because with my glasses I don't see any of this yellow flare, sodium flare from the torch. So if I do have a little something stuck to the end of the torch and it's just blazing yellow like a Roman candle, with these glasses on I can't see that, so I have to check from underneath. Alright, so this rod is clean, ready to go. Just going to get that gather a little bit bigger. And I was a little bit sloppy holding this big rod with the disc and the gold on it. You can see there's a little crack started to form. That is no good. We don't want that. If that gets bigger and goes all the way through, I will switch off to a metal handle. And I'll let you know what I'm doing then, because it looks goofy. More opportunities to watch and laugh, whether you're just watching for the first time or you actually have some glass working experience yourself. I got some people watching, a middle school friend of mine, Shnu, who's seen so many of these, she could probably make one of these in her sleep. Maybe, I don't know. Alright, so this gather is big, and you can see it's very hot. It wants to flop down, so I'm going to put it down on there and pull it away and separate it. Now it looks like a Hershey's Kiss. I'm going to just flatten it. Like that. Now, I'm going to do my first color. I'm going to use a turquoise. And put just a tiny dot of color on there. When you add a dot to something, you can use that dot like we did just here. That big clear gather is essentially a dot. In this case, instead of getting a ball on the end, I'm heating the end of the rod a lot more because I want to make a round dot of glass, and you can see it's got a similar shape, like a little kiss, a little molehill. But I didn't leave a lot of glass there because I want the color in this to be minimal, and I want the edges of this to be sharp. If you saw in the pre-show, you look at those colors on edge, they're like a razor blade. So rather than letting this melt in and diffuse the edges, I'm going to push it in. And by pushing it in and then melting the edge even, I'm going to make that line very sharp in the finished design. Oh, I forgot the UV glass. So I'm going to add around the perimeter of that dot of turquoise glass 7 little dots of UV. And that'll translate as to little swirly lines around the main dot. I'm going to melt those in with a little press and melt them so they're flat. And they are now entrenched within the surface of that glass. Can't even see them. They're almost invisible. Now I'm just going to keep it warm in the back flame and get my next gather on the clear rod, which is going to be a big dot, essentially. Not a tiny dot like that clear, but I'm going to melt quite a bit of the end of the rod and leave a bunch of the rod on there, like that whole second donut of clear glass that's on there right now. We're going to make a whole stack of those. And when you're doing the color ones and you have to melt another rod in between, it sort of slows down your process and you have to reheat the big rod. If I was doing just like metal pickups or melting from a little teeny tiny thread like that UV glass, I could go more quickly because I wouldn't have to let this cool and reheat all the way. But this is the requirement that I have for this design. To get it to look the way I want, this is the way that I'm doing it. You can do yours your way, and I'm sure it will be wonderful. Or it will look like crap. You can throw it away and do it my way, which is the right way. I'm just kidding. There's a million different ways to do all this stuff. Alright, I got a nice hot gather there. I'm going to put it down over that color. Separate that off and then flatten it. And then look, we've got another clear gather, another little donut of glass on there. And the color and the UV is now encapsulated. And because I melted it flat into the surface of the marble, I didn't trap any air. If you leave it bumpy, a lot of times when you're putting on another dot gather or a swipe gather, you're going to trap air. In this case, I don't want to trap air. There's a lot of instances where you may want to trap air because air traps in glass look like bubbles, and it's quite cool. Alright, so I put my green dot on there, and I could melt it in right now, but I'm going to add this glow powder stringer that I've made. The glow powder is ceramic, so it's quite a bit stiffer and harder to melt into the surface. You see all those little nubs sticking up? So I'm going to have to actually push those in. Excuse me. So I'm heating the surface. It's getting real hot. I'm going to push it in flat. Hit it with the torch one more time. And as the temperature increases and things turn orange, I can see my details a lot better. Here you can see it's gone flat. And now I can grab my clear rod and let's get that other gather on there. I don't get that comment, Shnu. I must have been saying something. I don't remember what I've said from moment to moment. I will review. Alright, so we've got our layer of metal, 2 colors mixed with UV glass. We're going to do one more gather, then we're going to pick up our last metal, which is the bookend of the inside of this tornado. It's basically the foil sandwiched between colors. And then I'll try to add an appropriate amount of clear glass to balance it in the middle, balance that sandwich in the middle of the glass sphere. The crack in my large rod has actually spread on the shaft of the rod. If it falls, I'll switch to a metal handle, but I think it's going to be alright. It's hard to know. Whenever you're going to be spending a lot of time on a marble, you don't want to have it attached integrally to the marble design with the glass rod. You want to switch off to a metal handle. So here we're going to add a nice hot gather, big dot of clear, make it flat. There's our next donut section. Let's get in the magnifying glass. Looks cool. Now I'm going to pick up I'm going to keep this rod heating up. I'm going to pick up my silver. And there, picked it up. Here's regular view. Magnification. I'm going to keep that warm without burning the silver off. It's even easier to burn silver off. You can burn off silver and gold, and it will fume onto a surface if you have another glass surface a little bit farther out. And that's a whole different cool technique. This one, I want to entrap that silver and gold leaf. The glass I use is ideally suited to that. If you switch to some of the harder glasses, borosilicate, that's very difficult to do. So they mostly do fuming. Oh, that's right. This is the correct way of doing things that I'm showing you right now. Can you take notes? Alright, this, another nice hot gather, is going to go on the silver. Come off. You can see the layers of stuff in between. When I start melting those layers together, you'll see them all. They'll look cool. I'm going to put one more dot of clear on the end of this, just because I know that's going to balance it from side to side, balance that sandwich of metal and color dots when I melt off this other rod. And what's going to happen is I'll put that next gather on. I'll attach a metal handle to this side. That other side that's been attached the whole time, we have that crack. It's probably just waiting to pop right off. And then I'll have to tweeze off quite a bit of that, because that's going to entrap a lot of air in those little cracks when I try to remelt it. And that's okay. I think when you're first starting out doing glass, you just leave the bubbles in there. Focus on your design, having some success getting things to come out the right shape. And then later, once you've had some success, then you can get picky and go back in and dig out little bubbles, correct your design. With the right tools, you can get in there and fix your design on the surface, and you can do it inside too. That takes a little more finesse and feel. But sometimes it's just not worth it to go in there and try to get something, because you'll mess it up. But I think it's worth it to try and find currently where your line is of what you can hope to correct, because that line will move depending on the design you're doing, the scale of what you're doing, where you are in your skill set. Alright, now all those lines, all those donuts are fusing together. Looks cool, you can see what's in there. I'm going to heat that up one more time. I'm going to hit the marble mold on there, some of these graphite hemispheres that I have for helping me shape things spherically. I'm going to just sphericalize the end just a hair before I put my metal handle on it. And I have a stainless steel rod that I use for handles for holding onto the glass. Most glassworkers call them punties, just to keep things easy to understand for people who may not do glassworking all the time. I'm calling them handles, because that's what they are. There, you see I've just shaped that just a little bit spherical. And you can see the silver leaf in that lens. All the layers that I made. Now I'm just going to heat up my stainless steel handle with a rod. So it just starts hitting yellow past orange. Then it can bore into the surface of the marble a little bit. And then this one just cracked off, I think, that rod. That was good timing, because I was just about to melt that off. So let's heat up the whole thing. I'm going to tweeze that portion that broke off down. And you see where that sort of acorn begins, that's the rest of my marble. Anyway, this other large rod section was a part that I was gonna melt off the rod right there anyway. But as I showed you during its construction, that crack was forming, and I was keeping my eye on it. It let go just as I was attaching my metal handle. I could feel it crack and a little bit of a shift in the feel of the glass. Like it became just a hair less connected to the marble. So I'm keeping the whole marble hot, because once I get this portion off, I'm going to try to get it as spherical as I can. And then I'm going to switch my my handles off, switch them 90 degrees off axis. So I'm taking them from this axis and I'm going to switch them around to this axis. Then I can start spinning it. And the heart of this tornado marble is basically that it's mostly clear and a few small elements, but it's that twisting and feeling of motion and furious action inside that we're going to capture. So there it looks even more like an acorn. That's what it would look like had I melted off the rod rather than having it crack off just a little farther down. So I'm going to turn my torch up in heat a little bit more. I want to melt this so that the little valleys between the cap and the stem of that acorn cap merge together on their own. if I push that shape into a sphericalness, I can easily trap a ring of air, which I'll have to go back in with tweezers and get out. But I know if I'm gentle with the heat and the spinning, I know that the surface tension of that glass will pull that spherical enough so that those lines will disappear. So you'll see it looks like an acorn now, but on its own in the next minute or so, it's going to pull in through surface tension and become more spherical. And once those valleys go from an oblique angle to an obtuse angle, then I can start pushing on them without trapping the air. Is that right? Oblique to obtuse? I think so. Oh, I was going to have a quiz today. Dang it. I ran out of time. Next time. I wanted to have a coupon and all kinds of stuff. The problem is that I guess these will go, after a couple weeks, I'll cycle these demos over to YouTube so they will be live. So having a quiz, not as exciting to watch if you're not there. Well, maybe it is, I don't know. I want to try it. And if I don't, and I forget, then I guess I'll mention it again at some point in the future, as if I was having that idea for the first time. And we'll laugh again. So the marble is starting to be spherical. It was acorn shaped. Got really hot and it was pulling in, and so you can see it's still got a hint of that shape. I'm going to just heat it and then hit it in the marble molds one more time. The thing about marble molds is that you start off in a mold where the hemisphere is bigger than the marble that you're working on. And you're just giving it a suggestion, a little push, a little gravity to change the shape, to improve it from whatever it is to more spherical. You're not trying to get the sphere perfect when you're in a larger hemisphere. You're just getting closer. And when you get close enough, then you can go to a hemisphere that's smaller than what is going to become the finished diameter of the marble. And then as you rotate it, change the angle of rotation, you're using the rim of the mold along the surface of the sphere to improve the spherical nature of it. So that improved the spherical shape quite a bit. And now I'm going to heat the chill marks out of the surface. When you go into the graphite molds, they draw a lot of heat out of the surface of the glass. And that quick drawing of heat out of the surface translates into ripples on the surface of the glass where it's solidifying. And then the liquid surface pushes into the surface that has solidified and makes a ripple behind it like a wave. Now, with the ripples smoothed out, you can see there's foil, color, foil. And then you can see along the same plane as the color, the little dots in the UV glass. I'm going to go into the bigger mold then and the rim mold one more time briefly, just to improve the spherical nature of this, just a hair more, before I switch my punties 90 degrees. So bigger, little pressure, then smaller, changing the angle of rotation as I spin. And we've achieved a more spherical shape. You could call that a marble right there. In fact, one I'm going to show in a couple of weeks is going to be like this, only instead of little dots, it's going to be letters. And then the letters will give a little twist. And then as you look through the layers, it will spell a word. Would you care to guess what that word will be? Because I'm not telling right now. So there. Is it because I haven't decided? Is it because I think I've decided, but I might change my mind? Have I decided and it's so cool that your mind is going to be blown and you won't be able to think of anything else till I make that marble? Let me say, to answer all of those questions, the answer is yes. Uh-oh. All right, so I'm going to add my handle, my stainless steel handle, 90 degrees from my existing one, like so. Now I'm going to superheat this handle, not superheat, I'm not going to vaporize it or turn it into plasma or anything like that. Star Trek. I'm just going to heat it enough so that it pulls out of the glass surface of the marble. So you can see it's loose already because it's orange. I'm going to heat it up a little bit more and it should go pop. Now, I'm just going to go back to that area where it was. You can see there's a little dimple where I pulled it out. And by heating it up, I'm just going to make sure there isn't any iron or steel particles in there that would show up as orange dots. And there isn't any, so that is good. Now, you can see I'm going the other way with my handle. I'm going to attach on the other side, and then we're going to twist those dots and that foil into our tornado. This marble got pretty big. It's going to be a nice one. So I'm just positioning my handles where I want them to be on the poles of this. This looks like it's close to my face, but it's about a foot away. Very cool. Just look at that all day. Alright. Now I need to heat the whole thing. And it needs to be heated evenly. When I say the whole thing, what I really mean is like the middle 80% of it. If the ends are hot, they'll just spin endlessly. So the ends have to remain a little bit firmer than the portion that I want to rotate. And in this case, it's really that middle 2/3 to 80% where all that action is that I want to spin. So I'm going back and forth like this to focus the flame in sort of a wide swath on the equator, or what's going to be the equator of this marble. And as I'm spinning it, I'm sort of letting it, I'm using one hand to spin and freewheel, letting the other hand freewheel, just holding it as a opinion point. But now, as the marble gets hotter, every once in a while, I'll just add a little pressure to one side and start to catch. So we're going to start seeing some motion, some spinning motion, get put in along the axis of this rotation. And it's going to start slow, and then as I see that my heat is balanced, I can start putting in more, especially if I see it spinning evenly. I can start putting in more and more spin and twist. I'll try to get closer to the camera here just for like a second. As soon as you can really see that twisting motion. See him start to turn. And this is another style of marble that you can do, which it's a fun style that I've demonstrated before, a wisp. This is, I guess, the first time I saw this style. It was like 25 years ago, and that was like the first time I'd ever seen any glass blowers doing this. And you really, Torchwork is the place where you can really see this technique blossom. And I would say, well, I'll keep my mouth shut about who I saw do it first, and then who perfected it after that. Because I suppose that could be contentious. But it was guys I was making marbles with back in the late 90s. They were quite a bit ahead of me in technique, I think, at the time. It really spurred my learning to look at what they were doing, and it's not like they were talking about what they were doing, but you could see in pictures, and so you just sit and try stuff and say, oh, how do you think they did that? Oh, maybe it was like this. Oh, no, that wasn't it. Let's try this. Maybe it was this. No, that wasn't it. And so just even trying and getting it wrong, there were so many other discoveries that I made that were great fun and great learning tools. If you just see what someone else is doing and copy it, that has its use, but it's not super useful as far as the creative process. It'd be okay for the technical process. I don't know. And it's kind of a jerk move, so don't do that. Unless you're making it clear, hey, I'm learning here, this is homage. So I've done all my spinning. I was talking too much, and all the spinning is in there. Look at that. Wow. So now I'm just going to spherical up. Spherical up. Love it. All right. This marble's already pretty hot. So, I'm going to put it through a larger hemisphere. And there's a lot of theory. I mean, I could, as far as how you approach the molds and where you put pressure and are you pushing and are you pulling at any given moment, and what's the idea behind how much bigger is bigger and how much smaller is smaller. It's like, wow, you could just talk about that for an hour. So here we are. That whole free end is now spherical. But you can see it's fuzzy. There's a good look inside there. But that's really hard to show with my current camera setup. I have a lot of other cameras I would like to at some point have like all four going, and I can't do it live like that because of software constraints and bandwidth constraints, but I think I can sync all the camera software after the fact, and then flip back and forth. And I could really show it then. But, I mean, I don't want to be a video editor. That's the thing. Alright, smooth that is. So, when I'm almost done, things are about as spherical as they're going to get. To do the final shaping and surface, I use a cherry wood marble mold, which is basically a paddle made out of cherry wood that's soaked in water that has holes drilled in it. So I can use either side. I'm just using the rim of those holes to further improve the sphericalness of the marble and the surface. I'm chilling the surface without putting in ripples, because the area that's touching that marble of the mold is so small in comparison to like a whole hemisphere of graphite, which is just sucking heat out of the marble rapidly. That thing is looking mighty nice. Alright, I want a reasonably firm attachment to be my last or second to last attachment. I'm keeping the whole marble warm back and forth. That's what I'm doing with this hand. This hand, I'm heating up a rod, clear glass rod, and I'm making the rod kind of a point. I'm actually going to make it a little bit flat because I want a slightly larger surface area to grab. And this glass handle is pretty long, so I'm going through some contortions here to get this last steel handle off. I'm going to heat that stainless steel handle so it gets really hot and wiggly. Pop it out. The idea of popping it out is to pull out a little bit, just a tiniest fraction of glass from the surface and not leave any particles of metal in the surface. And there are some in here. I'm going to see if I can show you that it's a little dot of orange at the end. You can just see it. Just for a second. As soon as the temperature drops, it blends in. But when it hits room temperature, you'll see that little dot, especially in the pictures, because the resolution on cameras is so good. I'll take pictures of these marbles, and you'll see them on the internet, and I've even shrank the pictures down. But the picture of the marble on the screen is like 5 times the size of the actual marble, which is great for seeing detail, but also horrible for seeing detail. So, on the side of the handle I just removed, I did the larger mold and smaller rim mold, and made that spherical, and left chill marks. You see the ripples, and you can see the ripples especially because of the reflection of the bulbs above us here. So now I'm going to flame polish that ripple surface away. I'm heating it. The surface will start to get a little bit orange, and then I'll see all the reflections above stop wavering and become steady. When that happens, I'm going to take the marble out of the flame and let the surface harden a little bit. Right now, I'm keeping it even, so not up or down like this, level. I'm spinning it very evenly at a speed appropriate to the moltenness of the glass. After it's had a few moments to calm down, I'm going to grab my cherry wood marble panel and give it a little spin, and each rim mold gets just like 3 or 4 seconds. Usually I'll hit 3, sometimes 4. Bigger marbles are going to have more heat built up into them, and the surface and certain depth into the marble has to be firm enough so that when I set it down and chill that last connection point and tap it off, I'm not going to deform the marble. So I have a little firm piece of fiber frax board next to me here, and I'm going to chill that last connection point and tap it off. Came off. I'm going to clean any loose debris off my torch. And I'm going to take that little nub with a rod attached as a handle to the marble and heat the surface of the marble until that little tiny attachment point becomes smooth. I'm flame polishing it. So I heat that small area intensely, back off for a second, heat it intensely again 3 or 4 times because I don't want to oxidize the surface of the glass. I just want to get it hot and let it move enough to eliminate that last dimple. I'm going to take a metal pair of tongs that I've built for picking up marbles. I heat them till they're orange, let the color just fade. It's a perfect temperature for grabbing hot glass. I can pick it up and transfer that marble to my annealing oven where it'll stay at 960 degrees for 2 hours. And I'm just going to quench my tool, and now I can take off my glasses, and I'm going to turn down the torch. I'm going to talk you through that procedure. So I'm turning off the main valve on the oxygen. The oxygen bleeds out of the line. I'm turning down the low side pressure gauge until it's completely off. Then I'm turning off the needle valve for the oxygen on the torch. Turning down the propane. Now I'm going to turn off the propane tank. I have a valve for it under here. I'm going to let all the propane bleed out of the line and burn off. You don't want a line full of propane in your work area in case it gets cut later by accident. You don't want an accident compounded into another accident. So there's all the propane. And just as it's going out, I close the valve. And that's safely bled. So now my annealing oven is going to, that's a pretty big marble. So that's going to stay at annealing temperature for 2 hours. Then in an hour, or in 2 hours, I'll turn it down. Then I'll come back and turn it down again an hour later, and then it will slowly cool down overnight. Tomorrow morning, I'll take pictures of it and put it on the Facebook group page, and you get to see if it came out or not. And I think it probably did. So thanks for watching, and I will see you guys all next week. That's all I can think of. I'll read back and see if there's any questions and answer them later tonight. All right, goodbye.